Are we hitting another debt ceiling crisis? And if not, what's happening with our government right now? Plus, will there be a government shutdown? And how will this impact our treasuries? Hello, members and super savers. I hope you're having a good week. These are the 3 questions I'll be covering in today's video because we've gotten quite a few inquiries lately about another impending debt ceiling crisis, the potential government shutdown, and the impact this will have on T-bills, notes, and other Treasury securities. As usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. So let's dive in now, folks, and try to clear up some confusion as it relates to the debt ceiling, government shutdowns, and your Treasury investments. The answer to this is no, at least not this year. The debt ceiling crisis from earlier this year was resolved in June by the so-called Fiscal Responsibility Act, the FRA. The FRA temporarily suspends the debt ceiling. Entitlement spending is allowed to run its course. Examples of entitlement spending include Social Security, Medicare, and interest and repayment on U.S. Treasury debt. However, the FRA put limits on enforceable discretionary spending for fiscal years 2024 and 2025, with separate limits for defense discretionary spending and non-defense discretionary spending. Having said this, it seems that some of our Diamond NestEgg regulars seem to think that we're hitting another debt ceiling deadline this month, which is a great lead into the next question. Here's the thing. Our federal government has 2 conditions, constraints, so to say, on spending, and both need to be met. Constraint number 1 is that our federal government cannot borrow more than Congress has authorized. This is the famous debt ceiling. The debt ceiling discussion is an important one because our federal government has been spending more than it takes in since 2001. Yes, 2001 was the last time the U.S. had a balanced budget. In other words, since 2001, our country has only been able to function by constantly borrowing more money and issuing those treasuries that so many of us own in our portfolios. So that's our federal government's first constraint, not being able to borrow more than what Congress has authorized, the debt ceiling. And that's what the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the FRA, dealt with in June by suspending the debt ceiling. Constraint number 2 is that our federal government can only spend money when it has a legal basis for doing so, which is different from the debt ceiling. This can be split into 2 categories, entitlements and discretionary spending. Entitlements, as I mentioned earlier, include such items as Social Security, Medicare, as well as interest and repayment on U.S. Treasury debt. Entitlements are authorized by a law that automatically allows the spending without additional approval by Congress. So, no need to agree on a budget every year here. These expenses will keep running automatically. The FRA dealt with this in June as well. Entitlement spending is allowed to run its course. Discretionary spending, on the other hand, needs to be authorized for every new financial year by a budget, or more precisely, 12 annual appropriations bills. And this is what's happening with our government right now, the budget discussion on discretionary spending, these 12 annual appropriations bills. And actually, the FRA dealt with this in June as well. It put limits on this discretionary spending for fiscal years 2024 and 2025, with separate limits for defense discretionary spending and non-defense discretionary spending. Remember this point. We'll be getting back to it. So, the reason that this budget discussion is happening in September is because the federal government's financial or fiscal year starts from October 1st of every year, but it's named after the year it ends in, meaning that at the time of this taping, we're in the final days of financial or fiscal year 2023, and this current fiscal year 2023 started on October 1st, 2022 and will end on September 30th, 2023. The current budget discussion, what's happening in Washington right now, is about the budget for the upcoming fiscal year 2024. Fiscal year 2024 will start on October 1st, 2023 and run until September 30th, 2024. So, with the new fiscal year starting on October 1st, 2023, which is very soon, the government needs a new budget to keep spending for these discretionary items. In the simplest terms, these separate 12 annual appropriations bills need to be passed by both the House and the Senate and then signed by the President before October 1st, 2023, in order for the U.S. to have a proper budget. Of course, nothing is ever that simple. Here's the problem. When the two political parties agreed in June to the FRA to suspend the debt ceiling crisis, to keep entitlement spending going, and to put limits on enforceable discretionary spending for fiscal years 2024 and 2025, they also agreed that enforceable discretionary spending this year, what's currently happening in Washington's budget discussions, that it would basically stay the same in fiscal year 2024 and 2025 as it was in fiscal year 2023. And depending on your point of view, that's either a not insignificant cut in real term spending, say hello to inflation, or not enough cutting in times of excessive budget deficits. Now, the Senate Appropriations Committee has already been discussing 12 draft appropriations bills that could now go for a vote on the full Senate floor, and all are more or less, depending on your perspective, in accordance with the June debt ceiling compromise. What's holding things up is that there are some Republican representatives in the House who are insisting on further cuts that would bring discretionary spending for 2024 below the level set in the FRA. They feel that our country is spending more than it can afford. And if we look at this chart and forecast here on our country's revenue, spending, and surplus or deficits as percentages of GDP, this is probably what's worrying them. The U.S. keeps spending ever more on an essentially flat revenue base, leading to increasing deficits and a growing national debt year after year, as this second chart shows. But that's the problem with this entire debt ceiling and budget process that our country has, that I detailed earlier for you. Every few years, our two political parties basically agree on the maximum amount our country can borrow by raising or suspending altogether the debt ceiling. And then every year, in a completely separate process where the debt ceiling is not really on the agenda, our politicians also have a budget discussion on how much they can spend without thinking, oh, will this take us above the debt ceiling that we agreed upon a while back? Now what, right? What if these 12 annual appropriations bills don't get passed by both the House and the Senate and then signed by the President before October 1st, 2023? What happens to our members and super savers, and what happens to our T-bills, notes, and other Treasury securities if the U.S. doesn't have a proper budget before then? You should know that the last time the U.S. had a proper budget in place on October 1st, meaning all 12 appropriations bills were voted and signed by the start of the new fiscal year, was for fiscal year 1997. In other words, starting our fiscal year while still fighting over the budget for that year has been an annual occurrence for the past 26 years, or even the past 27 years if you've already given up for this current fight as well. So this is not new territory. So when all or some of these appropriations bills don't get authorized in time, when the budget discussions keep dragging on, but a majority of Congress wants to avoid a shutdown, what will happen is that Congress can pass a temporary budget called a continuing resolution. That allows the administration to continue to function and spend money for a specific period of time. Continuing resolutions were passed 47 times between 2010 and 2022. So again, really nothing new to see here either. These continuing resolutions covered from 1 day to just under 6 months. And they usually continued the level of funding from the previous year, meaning they kept spending levels at the then current levels. And this seeming inability to pass proper budgets on time, by the way, seems to be one of the reasons that Fitch downgraded the US to AA+ from AAA this past summer. While I don't have a crystal ball, our best guess at the moment is that there is zero chance that our government will start fiscal year 2024 with a proper budget, meaning zero chance that all 12 of these appropriations bills will be passed by October 1st. If this happens and Congress does not pass a continuing resolution allowing the federal government to stay funded for a specific period of time, then there will be a government shutdown. And given the back and forth that's going on in Washington currently, we think the probability of a continuing resolution versus a shutdown is 50-50. I wish I could give you better probabilities, but it's really a coin toss at this point. As those of you who've been following the news recently can attest to, and if I were a betting kind of girl, which I'm not, but if I were, I'd bet that this continuing resolution versus shutdown decision will be made shortly before midnight on September 30th. Right before fiscal year 2024 begins on October 1st. But here's the thing. Even a government shutdown is not new territory. We had shutdowns in 1995, 1996 under President Clinton, in 2013 under President Obama, and in 2018 and 2019 under President Trump. And perhaps even more importantly, even a government shutdown will still keep most of the U.S. government's functions going. Here's the projected U.S. federal spending amount for the fiscal year 2023, ending on September 30th. So this month, on an annualized basis, around $6 trillion. Entitlement spending at about $4.394 trillion makes up roughly 73% of the overall federal budget. Remember, entitlement spending is written in a separate law apart from the appropriations bills and will continue without interruption, even if there is a government shutdown. Entitlement spending also includes some of the government's largest expenses, such as Social Security, Medicare, and what should be good news for a Treasury-owning community, interest and repayment on Treasury debt. This means that discretionary spending at about $1.602 trillion actually makes up only about 27% of the overall federal budget. Discretionary spending is what needs annual authorization by an appropriations bill, or at least by continuing resolution. However, not even all of this discretionary spending stops. Essential functions and services will continue. This includes key functions in national security, law enforcement, and air traffic control. So, the only part of the federal government that really comes to a halt is non-essential discretionary spending. Now, don't get me wrong, a government shutdown would be an inconvenience, not helpful to our economy, and basically a bit of a national embarrassment. And it would most likely give the ratings agencies more ammunition for potential future downgrades. But hey, it's not the first time, and the way things are looking, it's probably not going to be the last time either. Where a government shutdown, a halt in non-essential discretionary spending would hit us, as Americans, most is with things like delays in passport issuance, freezes of new applications for Social Security, and the closure of our world-famous national park system. And if you're a federal employee who is impacted by the government shutdown, you may have to dip into savings during this period, as you might only get your paycheck in arrears after the shutdown is over. Having said that, and to repeat it because it's important, recipients of Social Security and Medicare, as well as Treasury owners, will continue to get paid. And yes, the Treasury would even continue to issue new debt as needed. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we've already had a few shutdowns in living memory, with the most recent one lasting 34 days between December 21st, 2018 and January 25th, 2019. So we have a good feeling of what to expect, including the fact that Treasury debt payments and Treasury auctions continued during those shutdown periods. Even Treasury yields stayed relatively stable during past shutdowns. As we can see here, the gray area represents the partial government shutdown period between December 21st, 2018 and January 25th, 2019. The yellow line represents the 10-year Treasury note, and the green line represents the 3-month Treasury bill. All this is to say that the current budget battle in Washington will not be impacting our Treasury strategy, at least not for now. And to be clear again, it is a battle over the budget, not a debt ceiling crisis. We'll continue to buy our T-bills at auction and laddering them, and we'll continue looking out for other good opportunities in the fixed income market, whether that's TIPS, I-bonds, agencies, munis, or corporates. Check out this video here to get the latest update on our T-bill ladder and where we think yields are headed. So what about you? What do you think about our government's debt ceiling and budget negotiation crisis? And how does knowing what you know now after this video impact your Treasury strategy, if at all? Drop a comment below and let everyone know. All right, members and super savers, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. And if you did, I'd love to invite you to continue to support our channel through membership so that we can keep producing one-of-a-kind, sponsorship-free videos for our super saving community. Get your questions answered in our next live member Q&A on September 22nd at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And check out our latest fixed income member videos. To learn more about Diamond NestEgg membership, visit our channel page or the join link in the video description below. See you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.